Welcome into the Backroads Bill podcast. I'm Ben, and today we are going to be talking about a topic that at the time when we booked this podcast, it wasn't hyper topical. And now after Trump's inauguration and a lot of the stuff that's been happening between Canada and, the U.S. with tariffs and everything else that's going on, it's actually become very topical. In fact, Premier Doug Ford talked about it. And of course, with the who knows what's going on with the elections and stuff, at the time of recording, we're still waiting to hear if Ford will call an early election. And so we're going to be talking about something very topical, which is the Ring of Fire. Now, back in December of 2023, we had an episode on mine reclamation and environmental impacts of old mines. And we had Roy Slack, who is the president of cementation, or former president of cementation. He's still on the board there, joining us. And we talked a little bit about the Ring of Fire, but not a lot. And today we are going into the brass tacks of it with our guest, Stan Sudol, who is a mining journalist. He is the editor and owner of republicofmining.com. And we're just going to be going into a lot of the stuff a lot of the political side of things, why this has taken over 15 years and why it's so important, and what happens if, the Canadian government decides to maybe move away because they find something better, and the impact that would have on the economics in those places. So, we're not usually a political podcast, but today we are going into the politics a little bit because it does affect Northern Ontario, and this podcast is very Northern Ontario centric. So a lot of that on the way. But first, we just want to remind you, if you enjoy this podcast, consider giving us a like, a comment, a review, subscribe, whether it's on YouTube, on our North Bay Echo YouTube channel, or if you listen to this on Apple or Spotify. It helps us grow. And of course, we wouldn't be able to do this podcast without help from our amazing sponsors. And today's lead sponsor is Twigs Coffee Roasters.
North Bay Echo is proud to partner with Twigs Coffee Roasters, a part of the community since 1995. Twigs offers a wide selection of quality beans, fresh roasted in-house every day. Find your favorite specialty drinks at our espresso bar, rejuvenate with freshly squeezed juice, or treat yourself to mouth-watering selections from our gourmet deli. And don't forget our irresistible fresh baked goods, including uncompromising gluten-free options. Twigs has 5 locations to serve you, from North Bay to Sturgeon Falls to Sudbury. Order online for pickup at twigs.ca. And coming soon, you'll be able to order fresh roasted coffee beans direct to your doorstep from our distribution center in North Bay.
So we're talking about something today that we've talked about a little bit in the past, which is, of course, the Ring of Fire. Back in December 6th of not last year, but the year before, 2023, we had the pleasure to have former cementation president Roy Slack on the show, where we talked about a slew of different topics, and the Ring of Fire did come up. And today we are going to go deeper into that particular topic. Of course, it's very topical. And today's guest is Stan Sudol, who is a Toronto-based communications consultant, freelance mining columnist, and owner-editor of republicofmining.com. Stan, welcome to the Backroads Bill podcast.
Happy to be here.
Good to have you here, Stan. And it's just for all the viewers and listeners, right off the get-go, as I say, that the reason why Stan's on here today, the Ring of Fire is topical for it's a worldly topic in essence, but for Backroads Bill, during COVID, I drove a vehicle as far as you could, north of Ignace, north of Pickle Lake, past the Musselwhite Mine to North Caribou Lake, where the roads end and then the ice roads start in the wintertime, obviously. And then most recently, in this past spring, I drove north of Nikina by nearby Arrowland First Nation and went up to the Ogoki Reservoir, because I did a story on the height of land and reservoirs, and the Ogoki Reservoir, the dam there is bigger than the Hoover Dam in the United States, believe it or not. And then the road continues on towards Martin Falls, not completed yet. So anyway, these back roads get you out to the interior, but also these roads are going to take us to the Ring of Fire. But the first question, Stan, was give us a bit of a primer about what the Ring of Fire is, because it's been around for more than a decade, conceptually and otherwise.
It was first discovered in 206 or 207. It was initially a nickel, copper, PGM, platinum group metals mine. The initial discoverer, junior, who discovered it was Norart Resources. Norart has been taken over by Wailu Resources, an Australian a very huge Australian company. They've been for a number of years are working on the project, and of course one of the holdouts is basically we're needing road infrastructure to get into the camp. A second junior company, the largest land claims holder in the Ring of Fire, is Juno Corporation. Again, drilling, not yet discovered a viable deposit, but the geology is so attractive. I've been told by people at Juno it's basically like getting control of the Sudbury camp in the late 1800s, and people have, and myself included, have basically said that it is basically the most significant mineral discovery, definitely in Ontario and perhaps Canada, since the Sudbury Basin.
Yeah, no, we can talk about the Timmins mining camp or the Sudbury Basin, as you say. Just for geography, now I've mentioned Ignace and Nakina. Can you and it's a loosely defined area, larger, and it also involves a lot of First Nations, which we'll talk about, but maybe just tell us where it is as well.
It's about 600 kilometers northeast of Thunder Bay, and again, isolated, surrounded by a large number of First Nations communities. It's primarily, but not exclusively, on the traditional territories of Martin Falls and Webequie. Both communities are negotiating with the Ontario government. I've spoken to both chiefs, Chief Bruce and Chief Cornelius. They both see that the Ring of Fire has enormous potential for their impoverished communities, and hence for training and for supply service contracts. And actually, Wailu has mentioned that once the mine gets started, they envision roughly $100 million a year of supply service contracts going to Indigenous companies. And so they stand to benefit quite greatly. And because of the manpower requirements, it's going to spread beyond Martin Falls and Webequie. It's going to go to Arrowland, which is a proposed beginning of the north-south route to the Ring of Fire, Niskandica, Nabinimik. It's like the old diamond mine near Attawapiskat. You had people from across the James Bay and other First Nations communities working on the site.
Yeah. Now, given the location and the number of First Nations and these roads, now it's my understanding to date there are either one or two kind of corridors that are being considered, and First Nations are into the navigation of where these might go. Is that correct?
Well, basically, right now, where most people are focused on the north-south road, north of Arrowland, and you had mentioned the Ogoki side road or the road that you went up, and that's for much of the north-south route. It'll be on eskers, which are gravel deposits that were left behind by the glaciers, and the small patches of peatland that. So you're not going to be impacting the peatlands. That's the major point. But there are small sections that are just peatlands, and there's special engineering engineering structures that you can put on top of the peatland, so your impact on those small patches of peatland is very, very low.
Yeah. Now the road I was on, Ben, it's a good all weather road, so to speak, and it's used mostly for logging. And I did a calculation actually last night in Google Earth from where we were and a little further where the road ends, so to speak. It's still about 150 or 160 kilometers away to Martin Falls and then beyond. But that's where we're at right now. And so what's to come. What do you think, San? Is like this is 2025. President Trump has just been reelected. We're probably going to have, when this goes to air, whether the Ontario election has been called or is about to be called. What put that in your crystal ball? What do you think as far as road building is concerned? Where we're at with that right now?
Well, this can change. Okay. A week or two ago, Premier Ford had a news conference, and he's touting the critical minerals in the Ring of Fire is absolutely essential for as he put it, he's proposing to designate the Ring of Fire as a region of strategic importance to the national security of Canada and the U.S. And of course, there's not only just the nickel and the nickel, copper, platinum group metals deposit that Wyloo is developing. There's also chromite, which is absolutely essential for stainless steel. There's titanium, which is enormous military applications, and even and the reason I mention the chromite is because majority of the chromite in the world comes from South Africa, which is one of the most unequal societies in the world. We've been talking about the political instability of South Africa for a long, long time, and the chromite has sort of fallen asleep in the sense of on the public awareness, but it is still there. And as everyone's looking at Fortress, U.S. and Canada, having a deposit of chromite that can be used in Canada and the U.S. is absolutely critical. And of course, titanium for military applications. And I remember years ago speaking to an esteemed geoscientist. His first name escapes me, but it's Franklin. He was with the Geological Survey of Canada. He sadly passed away, and he professes that there's still enormous potential of gold in the Ring of Fire. And part of that is based on underneath the Ring of Fire are all these east-west running greenstone belts, and of course the most famous is the Abitibi that runs from Timmins and Kirkland Lake across the provincial border to Rouen and Val-d'Or. So that has not only generated millions of ounces of gold, but also enormous amounts of copper and zinc.
Ben.
Yeah, this is actually one of the questions. I was going to get to this later, but obviously with kind of going off the Trump coming into office, obviously a big story recently because he just got inaugurated while we're recording this just a few days ago. Obviously, he's already talking about tariffs on Canada, and so Stan, as somebody who's really in the journalist world of mining, what do you think Trump's effect could potentially have for the mining economy in Canada, and also as you were just talking about the Ring of Fire?
I think there's projects that are under development might be fast forwarded, and as alluded to Premier Ford's announcement about a region of national security or strategic importance. He wants to support that with special approvals process that significantly reduces the timelines to getting minerals out of the ground. So if you basically say to the President Trump, we've got this enormous geological treasure chest in the Ring of Fire, and we're starting the road sooner than later because we see the strategic importance of basically displacing any material that is supplied by China by friendly Canada. It might mitigate some of the harshness of the proposed tariffs that Trump is banging the drum on. And I just want to bring in the resource potential, not only the Ring of Fire, but all of Northern Ontario is extraordinary. If you know a little bit of the history, you see Northern Ontario has been Sudbury, the Sudbury camp, even steel production or iron ore production in northwestern Ontario historically has been all beneficial for not only the Canadian but American economy. Everyone's talking about Greenland is a mineral treasure chest, and it's just the hardships of exploration in Greenland are extraordinary. You have like a 2-month window to do any exploration. There's only 54,000 people there. There's one mine operating in Greenland, and they employ less than 100 people. So the American media, who are a little dubious about mining information at the best of times, hyping the importance of Greenland for mineral production, it just boggles the mind when much further south and in a province that has a very long 150 years of mining history, you're much more quickly able to get any of these minerals out of the ground in Northern Ontario or the Ring of Fire than you are in Greenland.
And it's interesting with the big thing with the Ring of Fire, of course, is the government / the mining companies, trying to work alongside the Indigenous people to make sure that, like, they're just trying to make sure that it's all good, because there's obviously a lot of contentious history between the two sectors. So, I guess, do you think that this will, knowing that there's a little bit of maybe a time crunch to get stuff done, in terms of negotiations, do you think that maybe the Indigenous people who are on the other side can use this maybe as leverage, or do you think that's going to come up as a potential thing in the future?
Well, it's complicated, absolutely, and there is even Chief Bruce of Martin Falls said something publicly the other day about, well, yes, you've negotiated with us and Quebecois, and it looks like an impending deal with Aeroland to get the road going. But there's still other communities that you need to reach out to and have some sort of an agreement with, and he has some validity there. The fact that it's been well over 15 years, 207, a little over 15 years since the discovery, and you're still having issues with potable water in some of these communities, and of course, with First Nations, mostly it's federal responsibility, but the province does take care of some of the services. It's like education. Eh, all what I'm basically saying is 10 years ago, I said there should be sort of a Marshall mining infrastructure plan for these communities. And the amount of investment in these communities over the past decade, when you really started to look at the importance of this the mineral deposits in plural, has been shameful. And it's both. The federal and the provincial governments are to blame. You should have gone in there and basically really come in with a plan to increase educational spending, increase housing, increase healthcare. There's a lot of social issues. CBC today was highlighting the suicide of a 10-year-old girl, not in these Ring of Fire communities, but a First Nations community that was just south of Pickle Lake. You can't tout to the world about this enormous potential and yet basically be very lackadaisical on the actual investment that you need in these communities to get them job ready. A case in point, I was in Webequie a year and a half ago, and I had a nice conversation with the principal of the high school. And basically, high school in Webequie goes to grade 10, grade 11, and grade 12 are online, and the graduation rates are really low. I know if the Ministry of Education does all their number crunching, well, statistically, they don't have enough kids to validate a grade 12 as opposed to grade 10, going up to grade 12 as opposed to grade 10. But you need to do sort of like a Pope's dispensation, an exception, because they are the closest community to the Ring of Fire. Their people are going to be the most impacted, and impacted in a beneficial way. You need to get their kids into high school education as soon as possible. So where is the Ontario province in increasing teachers on site to grade 12 as opposed to grade 10? And this isn't rocket science. I'm appalled that it still hasn't been done. Oh, we've been talking about it. Well, we need to act about it. We don't need to talk about it. So this is why there's resistance. There's a lot of talk from both levels of government. There isn't as much walk as there should be. And if there was, I think the road project might go faster.
Well, we're going to take a little bit of a break from Stan. Still lots on the way, including how long he thinks it will take to build the mine once it's been approved. So, yeah, we've been doing this for 15 years, but if we get the stamp today, how long is it going to take before we actually see production come out of the mine? That's going to be big, and that's important because, again, we're talking about stuff that might go into effect at the beginning of February. If we're years away, there's some stuff about that. So we're going to get all of that. We're going to get Stan's take on that. But we do need to thank another one of our great sponsors here on the Echo Network and of the Backroads Bill podcast, Source for Sports North Bay. Of course, they are a huge advocate in our community. Actually, Paul McLean, who's the owner of Source for Sports, he co-hosts the Echo Sportscast, which you can catch every Friday on the Echo Network. And it just shows, again, him and his team, they are in the community. If you go to any sporting event in North Bay, you will probably see Source for Sports either there as a sponsor or they've had their hands in around that event in some respect, whether it's equipment or jerseys or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're a huge advocate, not just for the community, but also for kids getting to play sports. They do so much to help parents who maybe don't have a lot of knowledge of the sport get the right equipment. And that's so important because, kids getting to play sports is a huge part of their childhood for many kids. And it's a great way to stay active. It's a great way to socialize. There are amazing benefits. And if you're not sure where to go, it's Source for Sports. So the next time you need any sort of sporting equipment or knowledge or know-how or whatever you need, make sure you visit Source for Sports North Bay at 1321 Fisher Street so Paul and his team can help you along your way. It's time to Toyota at North Bay Toyota. Attention truck lovers, have you been Tundra struck? The powerful and dependable Toyota Tundra is the new definition of grit. Ask us about amazing lease deals on a 2025 Tundra Double Cap SR 4-wheel drive and experience ingenious levels of capability, technology, and refinement. Or maybe you're an SUV lover? Take advantage of a limited shipment of 2025 RAV4s and discover the perfect blend of style, comfort, and efficiency in a compact SUV that ignites your desire to explore. Right now, get excellent lease deals on the Toyota RAV4 LE all-wheel drive and more. It's time to Toyota at North Bay Toyota, 640 McEwen, or online at northbaytoyota.com for details.
I want to go back to that point about communities. It's almost contemporary mines now don't build mining towns as they did in the past, but really maybe that's what they should revisit for these First Nation communities to create mining towns. And as we know, mines now operate, the workers come in for usually 2 weeks, 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out, and they're flown in or driven in, and there is no infrastructure other than at the mine. So it's an interesting point. How many First Nations are involved now with this? And again, we've started out with just the road because the road is not yet started, and we'll come back to your prediction about when the road may start. But how many First Nations are there with regards to the Ring of Fire?
Well, the Ring of Fire is basically dealing with the Matawa Tribal Council, which includes Arrowland, Martin Falls, and Webequie. Niskandica and Nabinimik are also part of the tribal council. There's 5 isolated communities, and then there's 4 road access communities. So you're dealing with communities with different requirements and needs. An isolated community obviously has much different requirements and emergencies than someone who is on a road access community like Constant Lake. And then on top of it, because the rivers flow into James Bay, Attawapiskat has been one of the most vocal critics. And basically, some of their traditional territory touches on some areas of the Ring of Fire. The problem with traditional territories is the Ontario government has refused to make the traditional territory maps public. There's always an excuse. Well, they don't want it. And so it's a real interesting problem with junior exploration companies because, well, where are the boundaries? And the boundaries tend to be a little bit flexible. And like 8 years ago or 9 years ago, just before the Ford government won their first election, I wrote a huge series of articles in the Sudbury Star. And one of the points of basically what does Northern Ontario want? And one of the points I said was that you need to make the traditional territory boundaries public, and you need to set up a tribunal because there's going to be a little friction here or there to be able to adjudicate individual communities and say, no, that's really ours or that's really theirs. Um, Suffice to say, the current chief of Martin Falls, it was a interesting little tidbit in a Globe and Mail piece a year ago, basically was born 25 kilometers outside of the Ring of Fire in a tent. so, so when Martin Falls says, this is our traditional territory, you have a chief who basically literally was born, adjacent to the Ring of Fire. So when other communities might claim, well, it's our territory, I think this guy's got a pretty solid claim that it is the traditional territory of Martin Falls.
And we're 15 years in, right? Just trying to get this off the ground. Let's say that this gets stamped today, like it gets approved, it's finally done today. How long until the Ring of Fire actually becomes a mine and everything's up and running and we're actually, producing stuff out of there?
Yeah, I was going to ask Dan about his prediction about all this because the road has not started. They're basically surveying it. I think that's
because they haven't done any mining stuff, eh? Like
no,
there's no. So the thing is, like when we talk about Trump and we talk about potential tariffs and stuff, it's February 1st. It's like if this thing's 5-10 years down the line, it's not going to help us out now anyway.
No roads, no mining, correct, Stan?
Yes. Unless there's massive gold deposits that are discovered, because then you can probably start mining gold and just fly the material out in a plane, or diamonds. But no, you're right. It is. It's hard to give you a definite timeline. Obviously, if by chance the agreement, and I've been told that there possibly will be agreement with Aeroland announced at the PDAC, which is March 3rd. So if there's an agreement, everything's hunky-dory. You have that section of road that you drove on, Bill, which is a forestry road. It needs to be upgraded to a mining-ready road. So that's about, did you say 80 kilometers?
Well, I think from my calculation, you've got to go to the end of the road, which now exists. It's about another 150 kilometers or thereabouts. I may be wrong about that, but still distance that they have to get to Martin Falls and beyond.
Oh yeah, but just the section that you drove on was about.
Yeah, I'd have to go back to it's a long way. We drove from Aeroland. You're driving, and so at least that, yes.
Okay. Well, starting to widen that road, one would think if there's a special designation passed by the Ford government, you already have a road. The need for an environmental assessment just seems redundant. If you could get across that obstacle and start widening that first 80 kilometers, it sends a very good message to Washington that we're not playing around, that we're going to start on this road. You could let me just bring in the alternative road, which was proposed years ago, the east-west road that goes from Pickle Lake, and you drove it up to Musselwhite. And if you take a look at that road, obviously the road up to Musselwhite is already built, and then there's a infrastructure project called the Watay Power Line, and that was almost complete. It's about 1,800 kilometers of grid power connecting about 17 isolated First Nations in the Northwest. Well, you've already got EAs done for the power line. I'm assuming it's 100 feet or 200 feet on either side because you might need a service road. After the Musselwhite Mine Road, why not piggyback on the Watay power line that goes all the way to Casablanca, which is another maybe 100, 120 kilometers, and it puts you that much closer to the Wemigway in the Ring of Fire, and then start focusing on a brand new road, because obviously there's no power line there, to connect the Ring of Fire and the Ring of Fire. Such a strategic asset, having only one road seems a little silly, especially if you can piggyback on the Watay power line to fairly cheaply build a second road.
Yeah, the Watay power line, it is, well, it was right beside the road that goes to North Caribou Lake, but at the same time, it is creating its own service road to service the towers that they're erecting. So this all makes sense. I mean, eventually there'll be, I think, all kinds of roads servicing all these communities based on the power line corridors. So the issue is a road, whether it's east-west or north-south, getting to that Ring of Fire and how quickly. And again, you can't crystal ball that, but let's hope that at the PDAC, Prospectors and Developers Convention in early March, that there will be an announcement and it'll start to go forward, whether it's the refurbishment of that first 80 kilometers on the north-south road, and even, of course, starting to get work on that beyond, because this is going to take a few years to get that road up and running.
Well, there's two other things that are happening here. First of all, global warming. Last year, there was a crisis in a lot of the NAN communities because the winter road was very short. And something in the media earlier this month basically said 2024 was the warmest year on record after a decade of being the warmest decade on record. So the urgency of connecting not only the Ring of Fire but these First Nations communities to a gravel road is much more urgent now than it was 2, 3, 4 years ago. That's one point. The next point is what happens if we because there's constant drilling going on. Juno is drilling once the drilling season gets back in, because they've stopped because it's been too dark and cold during January and December. So once they restart sometime, I think in March, what happens if they make another amazing discovery of something else that is of strategic importance to the American military-industrial complex, for instance? There are showings of titanium. So there's an urgency might facilitate a faster process if we, in a positive perfect storm, massive investment in these communities by the feds and the provincial people, a new deposit that absolutely justifies rapid road development. And let me point out two historical issues here in this country. We did build, in the 1880s, we did build the longest railroad at that time through the harshest geography on the planet in a matter of 5 years to connect Vancouver to Eastern Canada. And during World War II, the Alaska Highway was built in, get this, 8.5 months. Okay. And it was, I forgot to look the exact number, but it was like 2,000 kilometers. Like, the road was a really rough bush road. And of course, it was national security because of the fear of the Japanese invading Alaska. But the fact is, when mothers and the necessity of mother, or whatever the saying goes, when we need to do something fast, Canadians can do it fast.
Yeah, no, again, I'm glad you also mentioned earlier about the eskers, and the aggregate is there. And again, you mentioned about the peatlands and the geotextiles be laid down there. So the aggregate there, because that road that I've been on, both roads actually, there is the material around. So this accelerated road building process could occur Ben, you had a question.
Yeah, it's so I've had the pleasure of working with here at Clark Communications, like the umbrella of Echo. We work with a lot of mining clients, and but we also work with a lot of Indigenous clients as well. Like we always do the Anishinaabe Land Forum, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff we've done. We just recently did some work with cementation, and one of the things is I've seen both sides, right? I've seen the mining side and kind of what they're hoping to do, but I've also heard the other side from the Indigenous side and like why there's caution there and why it's taking so long, and it's interesting because one of the downsides with it taking so long, and I can't remember if we already mentioned it in this podcast, but let's say that they find a better spot somewhere else in Canada and they decide to go away from the Ring of Fire. That'll obviously, there's benefits to the Indigenous people and to these communities of having that kind of economy and infrastructure there. So let's say they decide to move away from the Ring of Fire. What do you think the impact would have on the Indigenous people that are there?
Massively negative. I mean, change is scary to people. I get that. Okay. And you're going to have a disruption of what you're used to, but the status quo is negative. There's no jobs. There's no employment. NAN, the umbrella Aboriginal organization that covers most of the isolated communities in the far northwest, basically says that there's 30,000 people there. Well, it varies from community to community, but I can basically tell you with a fair amount of assurance that 25 to 50% or 25 to 40% of the population is living off reserve because there's no opportunities. And so what do you do? Do you want to continue to live in poverty? And unfortunately, until the feds step in and make the necessary investments, and unfortunately, unless there's a multi-billion-dollar mine happening near your community, it just hasn't happened. Now, let's pull back to Detour Gold because it's in your neck of the woods because you're in North Bay. You basically, it's on the traditional territory of Moose Cree First Nation. The community is getting tens of millions of dollars in royalty payments. Roughly 20% of the workforce in the Detour Gold open pit is Indigenous. The benefits that has brought to Moose Cree is just insurmountable. And then, Bill, you said you were going by Musselwhite. It's a gold mine that will be going because of the type of gold mine it is. These are generally long-term gold mines, and that Musselwhite was one of the first impact benefit agreements structured in Ontario, and the surrounding communities, North Caribou being one of them, benefit with employment and supply and service contracts. So there is an enormous benefit to these communities with sustainable mine development.
Yeah, and I think, I've been to so many mines with our Canadian Ecology Centre teachers tours and the like, trying to show people about the four pillars of modern mining. And I think it's safe to say we've done a better job with Indigenous economic benefit agreements and negotiations and things like that. That often we get questions about that, and of course we'd like to have Indigenous people answer those questions so the benefits, so people understand the benefits are there. And of course we're bringing this all back to building the roads because there will be for the most part positive advantages to that. You mentioned about education, but just servicing, the price of food will go down, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a complex. You started off by saying it's a complex situation, and let's hope in 2025 now that we actually see the road being announced to be built and going forward.
Well, I think right now one of the primary geopolitical concerns to the Americans and Donald Trump is the this global race for strategic minerals and critical minerals. And the Chinese have been much more on the ball with this, and they have basically encircled Africa and South America and bought up many of the most valuable assets that are needed for electric vehicles and to mitigate global warming, solar and wind. Um, and one of the primary issues with the Americans who were kind of caught asleep at the switch because everyone basically thought, well, it's just metals. We can get it wherever we want. Well, not anymore. And Canada is just a natural ally to the Americans. And the geological riches of Northern Ontario and Canada are basically there for the benefit of the Americans. I did a article years ago on the top 10 mining men in Canadian history, and basically they're history. It's men. I'm sorry, I don't. It was just the way of the time, so that's why they ended up all being men. And four of the top 10 were American. That is how integrated the Canadian mining industry is. Americans were there at the very beginning. Even the beginning of Sudbury, it was American money and technical ability that managed to finally separate copper from nickel, because initially they were trying to figure out how to separate it, and then it was American intelligence that basically realized, well, if you mix nickel with steel, you get this super steel, and if we put it on our boats, we're like nuclear. We're the best in the world because none of the competitors can freaking destroy our boats because of this nickel hardened steel that the dreadnoughts and the boats at that time had. So it is only fitting that there is an integration with like Danielle Smith from the Premier of Alberta is always talking about an integration between the American and Canadian oil industries, but there is also a really solid integration between much of the uranium mineral mining in Canada and the United States. So it is to benefit, as Ford has said, this is a strategic deposit. There's potential for a lot of other discoveries in the Ring of Fire, and it will produce the critical minerals that the Americans want because their priority now is security supply. Now, just one final little tidbit from the past. Um, after uh, after the Korean War, the American military nickel was absolutely critical. There was even during World War II, there's absolute shortages for nickel because everything that went boom in a war needed nickel hardened steels. So the American military was so concerned that most of their nickel was coming from Inco that they gave, in 1953, they gave Falconbridge $40 million to build a nickel mine in Sudbury just so that they could diversify their supply of nickel. And that $40 million in 1953 is probably around $400 million in 2025. So as they say, you go back to the future, again, the American military is very, very concerned about how China has basically gotten control of many of the strategic critical mineral deposits around the world. And as Ford has said, the Ring of Fire is an absolute godsend to be able to break that control.
This has been a great primer on the Ring of Fire, and there's more, Ben, to come about this story on the Backroads.
Absolutely. And I know we were just talking about the election that potentially could be called as early as next week. Well, depending on when this comes out and how it shakes out in the next couple of weeks. And it's interesting how all of a sudden, right, based within a month, the Ring of Fire, which has been something that's been there forever, is now come at the forefront. And it'll be interesting to see how much we'll see other parties' campaign be revolved around it, because obviously people who live here, they're going to be thinking of big issues like homelessness or immigration or cost of living, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it'll be interesting to see how much that the Ring of Fire now gets put into the forefront outside of people who are just necessarily in their industry. Stan, before we let you go, do you think that's going to be a case? Do you think that the Ring of Fire is now going to become a main part of the election
I'm hoping so. I mean, there's 2 points here. First, the development of the Ring of Fire would go a long way into alleviating Trump's concerns and maybe mitigating his tariffs. And then number 2, everything you say is true: homelessness, education, healthcare. But we have to understand, you need economic development, resource development, sustainable resource development produces high-paying jobs. It's the largest employer of Indigenous people in the country, and the economic impact of mineral development flows throughout the entire economy and provides necessary tax revenue. And it's not just the mines in the Ring of Fire. It's basically Wyloo has slated a nickel sulfite refinery in Sudbury. The chromite could see the construction of a ferrochrome facility. Initially, they were thinking of Sault Ste. Marie, but it could be in Thunder Bay. Just a little side note: there's a potential of the biggest lithium deposit north of Red Lake. Well, if that gets developed and the roads are built to it, you could see a lithium refinery in Thunder Bay. So there's enormous economic generating potential from the Ring of Fire and other mineral deposits throughout Northern Ontario. It should be in the election.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Stan, so much for taking some time, and we might bring you back on depending on how the Ring of Fire shakes out. If it gets approved, we might have you on for round 2.
I'll be more than happy to be here with that good news.
A big thank you to Stan for jumping on with us today. It was such a good, interesting topic, and going into this, just didn't realize how topical it would be until we got closer to the recording, and me and Bill realized, yeah, this is pretty timely, which is not the way it was intended. It wasn't intended to be that way, but hopefully we got the point across, and we put a little bit of an interesting viewpoint on it, and maybe you'll learn something new, which is what we're here to do. So if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit that like button, you give us a review, you comment. Any interaction is going to help us. Of course, just clicking play and listening to this episode also helps us out, but you'll want to make sure you click subscribe and follow on the North Bay Echo socials and the North Bay Echo YouTube channel. And of course, if you listen to this podcast on Spotify or Apple, so that you can keep up to date with everything the Echo Network does. New episodes of Backroads Bill, they drop every single Wednesday morning on your favorite podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple, YouTube, etc., etc., etc. You can find us all over the place. And of course, you can always find everything we do from this podcast to all the other podcasts across our network at our website, NorthBayEcho.ca. Again, go to for all things North Bay podcasting. It doesn't matter if you're looking for local politics, community issues. We've got you covered with the Echo Essentials podcast. Discovering new things about North Bay. We've got with that in To North Bay with Love. Or maybe you want to keep up to date with NDA and other club sports that are happening that aren't being covered in North Bay and traditional media. We have that as well in the Echo Sportscast. All of that is available at NorthBayEcho.ca, so go out there and check it out. Of course, also check out our socials, North Bay Echo, and check out our YouTube channel under North Bay Echo as well. So that does it for Bill and I. We will be back next week for yet another Backroads adventure.